Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I've spoken to a lot of events for the ACFE, and it's a great honour to be invited by your chapter to come and speak today about investigating cybercrime in a cloud environment. Now, can you just confirm, please, you can see the screen clearly?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Yes, sir. Oh, very good. So thank you very much for the invitation. One of the points that came out in the summary of the comments from the last presentation was the plain language. When we talk about cloud computing, it can get very complex and credible. So we're going to avoid all complexity today when we talk about the cloud computing environment, and we'll keep it at a level which people who've got mixed levels of knowledge, because it's an area that all investigators, whether you're a CFE or otherwise, are now going to be operating in. So these are the key features we want to cover in the next hour. So if you walk away from this presentation and have a bit of an understanding of what the cloud is, what's relevant to us all as investigators, regardless of whether we are in the world, understand how we do investigations in the cloud, the understanding of legal jurisdiction, because as CFEs and investigators, we work in an ethical environment. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about is cloud computers being based in different countries and evidence being under different legal jurisdictions. So as CFEs and investigators, we need to understand that the evidence we seek may not be in our country. And one of the other last slides of the previous presentation mentioned an investigation plan, and this will be relevant, and we'll talk about this towards the end of the presentation. The value of having an investigation plan, whether it's for your own your organization that has a cyber breach, or alternatively, you are called in as an external expert, being a CFE, to come and conduct an investigation, knowing straight away some of the tricks involving the cloud will be of value to you. So as we look through our careers, things change quickly. How we did our job 10 or 20 years ago is very different to how we do our job today. And that's just the evolution of investigations, society, life, and technology. The thing about the cloud is from a desire of people to be able to access their data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Now people have a desire to be able to access their data without delay. It's part of what our society is today. So whereas once you had all your technology in a local environment within the building you're investigating, that has now changed. So as the technology changes, we as investigators must change too. And we are the leaders of the CFE to understand how to ethically and competently investigate in this new challenging environment. Because cloud is becoming more and more popular. You look through the United States and even in Australia and a lot of other countries, and quite probably your own country, governments are saying when they go to replace technology, cloud first. Do not buy the computers, the big computer servers, and all their very, very expensive local architecture, which costs a lot of money, a lot of maintenance, and has to be replaced regularly and serviced. It's cheaper and more efficient to use a cloud provider to use their products and pay for all the storage and the operating from operational rather than capital expenditure. So the cloud, we're going to show in the next couple of slides what the cloud is, but it's always available, it's convenient. Now here's an interesting point for you as investigators. It's called multi-tenancy. The evidence that you seek in a cloud computing environment is shared amongst literally thousands and maybe millions of other clients. It's not like you go and seize a phone or a computer, desktop, a laptop, and all your evidence is in that. In the cloud, the data is stored according to computer algorithms that make sense to the computer, but probably don't make much sense to any of us because it's so complex. The data does not stay in any one spot for very long. It's constantly moving based on the mathematical algorithms. And so where you think your data is today, when I say data, is your investigative evidence, it moves regularly based on the mathematics of the cloud provider. But we're not going to go into that detail, but just be aware that data moves, and it's our job as investigators is to understand that. And you cover that in a court environment by talking with the cloud provider, and they can provide you a lot of assistance. So these are the main cloud providers you would see. If you use Microsoft Office 365, for example, that's a cloud service. You've got Apple, you've got Google, Amazon Web Services, the biggest cloud provider in the world. If you use Dropbox, that's a cloud provider. That's very popular throughout the world. And it's a very well accepted storage. So these are just a handful of the biggest cloud providers in the world. So while we think the cloud may be something like this, but the reality, this is the cloud. This is where your evidence is. Somewhere in there, and in warehouses, in hundreds and hundreds and thousands of rows of what you are seeing in front of you, your digital evidence is stored in there amongst all the savings and offerings of other clients. What you see there may hold the services of thousands of different individual clients. And we as fraud examiners, we only need what we need for our investigation. So here's another, this is what the cloud is. So perception versus reality are two very, very different things. So for my thesis, I went over to the US, and I was fortunate enough, very privileged to speak to the chief security officer of one of the biggest cloud computing providers in the world. You'll all know this company, but I'm not allowed to mention its name because of the ethics consent form for the interview. And the interview was based around, if I'm investigating a cybercrime or a computer hacking and the evidence is on your computer servers, where is it? And this gentleman said, I do not know. And he was not being flippant. He just said the data moves so quickly and is stored so complexly, we cannot necessarily find it. And they said, we have 23 different data storage centers in different legal jurisdictions. The evidence that we seek as investigators may be stored in one, or it could be spread across all 23. So think about that from the complexity. If you've got a major fraud you're investigating, for example, and the evidence is up in the cloud, you would not want to walk down a road like this and try and find evidence. You would talk to the cloud provider, give them the facts and your legal authority, and you would ask them to provide it for you. But it's important you understand, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, that your data is not necessarily where you think it is. And that's where, if you log on and try and seize data, you have to understand where it is because of the ethical questions regarding international jurisdictions and international law. So let's just have a little quick look at how we got here to the cloud. The data that all the technology, it lasts shortly. What was great technology once is now in the rubbish bin. Back in 1992, this was brand new technology. The 5 1/4 inch drive had been around for a little while, and now it's become so popular, it was on the front cover of Time magazine with a young Bill Gates. And one of the amazing things about this, and those of you who've been involved in the technology scene for a while, remember you used to have different formats of storage, tapes, but having this 5 1/4 inch drive meant you could easily take data from one computer and take it across to other. But like all forms of technology, that didn't last long. And then we got these. More documents, smaller devices, easier to move, lots of devices. Then we moved up to the CD, and you can see there on the inside what has been burnt and what has not been burnt. You could originally only use one of these, but this was tremendous advances in technology from that and that. Then you've got these double layers, now 8.5 gig. You're looking at 94 to 170,000 Word documents, roughly, you could fit in them depending on what the document is and images, etc. Now, investigators who have been around a while would remember seizing piles of these things and having to examine them. You're now getting to the stage where the ability of a single individual to go through a pile of these things, examine every single document, and identify where your evidence is in this is now going away. You could possibly do that with these, but now you're getting to very big numbers. And now you've got the gigs, and now you've got these go 64 gigs, 128 gigs, USB devices, external storage, now in the terabytes. We cannot examine these, but each of these is an advancement on what is before. So as all of these things have moved and progressed, we now have this. And each of these are going to end up in the museum alongside the 5.25 inch drive. So as investigators, all this technologies that we use today is disappearing, and now we have the cloud. And this is our crime scene. This is where we must find our evidence. And this is where we must ethically capture it. And this is where we must understand and explain it to the court according to your local rules of evidence and how it was legally and ethically captured according to the laws of your jurisdiction, and how it was complete in its capture, not just a bit of the evidence that we could get, but all of it. So we've got some challenges there, not just the technology, but also the ethical way we capture data. So here we are. Now we have this technology that has evolved to our data spread around the world, merged with literally millions of other clients. It can move by the microsecond to and from countries we have no knowledge of. Secured by an end user license agreement no one has ever read, and regularly changes. What could possibly go wrong? Now, data moves by the microsecond, sometimes because it's let's just take your own personal circumstances. If you're using certain documents, they will move it to data storage closer to where you happen to be. Sometimes they move the data where electricity in the world is cheaper. Sometimes they promise to keep it within a regional jurisdiction, such as in your own country. Sometimes they just say you put it up in the cloud and it goes where it goes. The end user license agreement is very, very rarely read by anyone. I spoke to the lawyers of one of the cloud providers I spoke, and they said they know for a fact, unless you're dealing with a major government or a major multinational corporation, no one ever reads the end user license agreement, and people just agree to everything without looking at it. Now, when you have your own data, for example, there might be sensitive data and you do not want it leaving your legal jurisdiction, you would be examining it very closely, the end user license agreement, to make sure it stays within your legal jurisdiction and doesn't leave the country. So here's some researchers, and they said if in the cloud you don't get hacked, it'll be just when and how severe it is. Cloud can be hacked just like anything else. So here's a case study we looked at a couple of years ago, and I'll refer to this regularly as we start looking through the issues involving cloud from the perspective of the investigator. We had a client come in one evening and complained one of her employees had left in a very, very aggressive dispute, and they wondered what he had done just before he left. What he had done was he had resigned. He'd had a major argument with the company, which is totally unrequired, was totally provoked, so he had an agenda, went back to his desk, fiddled on his desk for a few minutes, walked out the door and slammed the door. Staff wanted to know what he did, so they checked his computer, nothing. Checked his email, couldn't see anything. Checked the sent folder, nothing. Checked the deleted folder, and what he had done from the time he had resigned, he had sent all the corporate secrets and all the corporate intellectual property to his personal cloud account. So think about this from the perspective of you have been called in as the fraud examiner before it goes to law enforcement, and they want something to be done. So you have a couple of crime scenes. One, you have the employee's desk where that computer is. That has got evidence. But you can investigate this as thoroughly as you want, but the damage has been done. The intellectual property has gone. $15 million. If it hits the open market, this company is finished because competitors wanted their IP. The company could be bankrupt, and the owners got personal guarantees to the company, and they could be bankrupt as well. And there's potentially 100 people who are employed by the company could lose their jobs. So the stakes were very high, and the risk to the company was extreme. And a vindictive employee left the business and took all the IP with him. In your own career, you may well have come across employees who have gone to work for a competitor and taken all the intellectual property with them, clients list, banking lists, whether it's intellectual property, new products design. So where you once had all your data close by, now it's up in this cloud. Now, where was this cloud? Turned out it was a US-based cloud, so that gave us something to work with. Now, we'll refer to this regularly from the perspective of the investigator as we start to address the issues. So in this particular case, where is the evidence? As fraud examiners, we work with facts. We have to get facts. In this particular case, some very, very strong evidence and facts was on the guy's computer. But the big evidence was in his cloud account. I had to prove that it was his cloud account. I had to prove that he had access to it. But the cloud account was based in the United States, not in Australia. Evidence could have been spread across multiple servers. This particular cloud company had numerous servers based around the world. So that intellectual property could have been stored on computer servers in multiple countries. And just when someone looks at it, the cloud provider brings it all together. Data's on the move, as we said. So even the cloud provider might not know where that $15 million worth of IP is until they go looking. Now, countries like the European Union, for example, have very, very strong data security laws. France and Germany have their own security laws regarding data privacy that sits underneath the European Union. One cloud company I spoke to said they did remote forensics. From California, they logged into France. They had a problem with the computer, so they imaged it, they took a copy. What they did was downloaded all their corporate data on their corporate clients that was on their corporate computer in their corporate offices in France. They got told by French authorities, you cannot remove personally identifiable information from that country, even if it's your own corporate data, without authority. So this is an example of when we tread up in the cloud, we must tread warily, because they were not doing anything unethical. They thought they were doing the right thing, but they learned a lesson. So as CFEs, we must tread that ethical line very clearly. So the short answer is, where's the evidence and how do I get it? The short answer is you get hold of the lawyers at the cloud provider and ask for their help. And that was a very important thing that came out of my research. I spoke to the corporate lawyers of this particular company, and they said they wish more people would contact them directly if they need help on investigations. They said they would rather help you than have you stumbling around, because we all stumble around sometimes, especially when it comes to new technology. I know I have enough, and you learn lessons. You don't need to learn these lessons the hard way. If you get hold of the cloud provider and say, where's the evidence? This is what we need. How do we get it? They've said they are very happy to help you. They're so happy to help you that if you have to get a court order in the US, and you might work for large multinationals who have got offices in the US and can get the corporate lawyers to quickly get an order, they will tell you the exact wording on whatever request you put in to make sure you get exactly what you need. They said they get orders that they just cannot understand, or orders which they just legally cannot comply with. So if you do come in as an investigator and you're working in the cloud and there's no clear pathway on how you can obtain your evidence, which is up in these cloud service providers, the strong advice from the cloud lawyers is contact them and they will lead you on the pathway on how to get your evidence legally and ethically. So for example, here's Google servers. Look at them all spread around the world. You have them in your country, we have them in Australia. They are literally all over the world. So we must treat warily. Here's another issue you must deal with. You might deal with an organisation that suffers a very large data breach and you're brought in as part of the investigation team. As a CFE, you've got the knowledge, the experience, the skills to do the job. If you're going to try and image all the corporate data off a cloud service, you could be there a very long time. It could take literally weeks to get. The volume of data in these particular accounts is huge. When you talk to your digital forensics examiners, they will not have the opportunity to download all the data for the simple reason there is too much. And that is why you talk and you have a meeting with your team. What do we need? How much evidence do we need? What is the evidence we need? Talk to the cloud providers. How do we get it? And what is the correct pathway to get it? Ask for what you need, not just what you can get. There might be clear pathways in the end user license agreement where you can go ahead and get data and image. It might be in your own legal jurisdiction, for example, and the end user license agreement your organization has negotiated. They might have a pathway on how you can get this evidence. But it's not simple. A little bit of homework needs to be done first. And this is where the investigation plan comes in. Understanding the evidence, it can be complex, but as all investigators to know, none of us know everything. And this is where we bring in independent specialists. Digital forensic examiners, they will understand a lot of this stuff. As the CFE investigator, you're on the front line. You do not have to be an expert on absolutely everything, on absolutely every piece of the time. None of us do. I certainly don't. And it helps to expand your investigation team to have access to experts who can add value to your investigation. And here's another problem. You have evidence management. You are pulling in evidence from overseas potentially. And like all legal jurisdictions, the person who puts the evidence to the court has to prove its value, its legality, and its value to the case. If you cannot prove your evidence in court and the judge says, I'm not comfortable with what it is, then you lose your case. And if you lose your case, I imagine it's similar in your country, it is in Australia. If you lose a civil case in court, it's a very, very expensive experience. So you must follow what's called the chain of custody, which is evidence management from the time it's recovered from the cloud server until the time it's produced in your court. And that can involve multiple people. And again, you talk to your lawyers, the lawyers at the cloud provider, and the people I spoke to there, the digital forensic people are often ex-law enforcement and they know exactly what you need. They are more than happy to help you and they will provide you what you need. It all comes down to asking promptly and asking accurately for what you want and opening a discussion with the cloud providers. What do I need? How can I get it? What is the legal pathway? How long does it take? Or in the very first instance, say, look, we're going to seek some evidence from you. Can you please preserve this evidence for our follow-up legal requests? Because they will preserve it for you if you ask. And this is all part of your conversation early in the piece. And I might just say here, this is all very general advice in the first instance. Before you, as you build your investigation plan or you start seeking investigation advice, always bring in a legal representative who can give you specific advice for your specific circumstances in your specific legal jurisdiction. Because what's legal in one jurisdiction might not be legal in another. So I can give you general advice and introduction to the subject here, but I strongly recommend you always get your own legal advice before you start. And this comes back to the investigation plan, which was well mentioned in the previous presentation and to which I've referenced several times. Independent legal advice that suits your circumstances is absolutely critical. So take what I give you as an introduction to the subject, but get your own independent advice that covers your legal jurisdiction. Some of the evidence that you require, you may not be able to access, and this is particularly computer logs. Computer logs, in the computer term, is like having a video camera watching a crime scene when the bad guy does the act. Computer logs will give you very, very powerful evidence, but in a cloud environment, you probably can't obtain them without the authority of the cloud provider, because they're stored in a part of the computer infrastructure which is well away from the clients. Your clients might be able to get some logs on various things depending on one of the numerous cloud products that are available, but it'll be a case of you have to ask them. And when you ask them, they will give them a briefing of what happened, how it happened, why it happened, what you're looking for, have a conversation, and computer logs are the breadcrumbs which will give you the evidence to fill in a lot of the gaps, including possibly who the offender is. Sometimes you cannot get everything. They can only give you a snapshot at a certain time. For example, if the offender has been in the cloud and deleted a lot of evidence, you may be able to get what's called a snapshot of what was on previously. And the snapshot is what the system looked like this time last week, for example. You've got a week's worth of transactions which are not recorded, not backed up, because they're not due to be backed up again until next week, but you will get a snapshot and a working knowledge of what it looked like. The underlying infrastructure we do not have access to unless we actually go and have a chat and see what's happening, and we ask the question. We're going to talk about remote forensics at the moment, because a lot of digital forensics examiners log on from their own jurisdiction and then just download data. Maybe that's legal in your jurisdiction, maybe it's not, but it could also be illegal in the jurisdiction where you are targeting. For example, I mentioned France, Germany, and the European Union have very strong data privacy rules. So you have to understand where you, not only the law in your particular country, but the law in the other country. For example, the US did a remote forensic examination on a computer in Russia many years ago. Very legal in America, very illegal in Russia. And so there was arrest warrants for the FBI agents put out, which may or may not still be in force. But you have to understand, when you do this digital forensic examination and you touch computers in a foreign legal jurisdiction, then you are under their rules of law as well. And we don't want anyone running the risk of being prosecuted themselves for removing of intellectual property. Some cloud service providers, CSP, cloud service providers, do not like businesses doing forensic examinations. When I say digital forensic examination, it is the same as if you got a laptop off a person's desk and gave it to your digital examiner and they did an image. Cloud providers do not like that because it slows down the bandwidth of their systems, and also, depending how aggressive the software or the examiner is, they might accidentally take other clients' data as well. If the examiner gets too aggressive, or the tools they use are too aggressive, they can get into the cloud infrastructure and potentially cause damage, and you don't want to be sued for causing damage to a cloud provider and several 100,000 of their clients. And it comes back to this jurisdiction of the legality again. What is your court's jurisdiction? What is their understanding on evidence which they may or may not feel was legally or illegally obtained? This is starting to get a little bit complex here for the investigator, because not every cloud provider you go to will have their own data. For example, Dropbox does not own its own cloud service. It hires service off another cloud provider. Amazon Web Services is probably the biggest cloud provider in the world by a long way, and they have a lot of other businesses provide cloud services. They might go and say to Amazon, we want 100 terabytes worth of storage to start up our own cloud providing service. So you might be, as an investigator, have some evidence on the secondary cloud provider as well as on Amazon Web Service. So let's say Amazon gives 100 terabytes of data to ABC Cloud Proprietary. Your client that you've been called to investigate as a CFE is a client of ABC. You've got evidence in ABC's cloud and you've got evidence in Amazon's Web Services cloud. Unfortunately, that is just the way it goes. The logs that you need may well, for authentication of who's hacked into your client, might well come from Amazon, or it might come from ABC. That's a little bit complex, but it's a situation you are going to have to address, because with cloud, the answers are not as simple as it is when you find a laptop or a desktop or a phone or a computer server sitting in the office you have been called in as a fraud examiner. So where do you get your evidence? You would ask your client to contact, or for the authority to speak to the cloud provider. What can you give me? Can you give me everything? If ABC says we can give you a lot of stuff, but Amazon hold various logs which you need, then that would be a secondary complaint as well. It's inconvenient, it's complex, but it's doing our jobs and being as thorough as we can. And this is one of the other issues. Not only resellers, but you have to be fast in how you contact these people, the cloud providers, because a lot of them do not hold the logs, the breadcrumbs that you need to find out who did what for very long, because it takes up too much storage. The cloud storage is absolutely extreme, how much storage they keep with logs. So in the case that I just explained before, the case study with $15 million IP, the very first thing we did was, when we got back to the office, was to get hold of the cloud provider. Say we are putting in a request for evidence, including, computer logs. And that is what you would do. Get hold of the cloud provider straight away and say, this is what we're doing. Please preserve the evidence that we require, including the computer logs. And this is another problem, because data gets deleted so quickly. In the cloud, even though the clouds are absolutely massive and they have monstrous levels of storage, when data is deleted in a cloud environment, it's overwritten very, very quickly, because there is only limited storage. Even though it's beyond most of our comprehension, it is still overwritten very, very quickly. Also look at that bottom point. Suspect may have access to the deleted evidence. So you're called in as a CFE to come in and investigate a matter. You start doing your investigation as you normally do. You're on top of all the problems. You're onto the cloud provider nice and early. But while you are still working, the suspect identifies that you are commencing your investigation, and they log into the cloud providers from another location and destroy all the evidence. And that has happened before. It happens on mobile phones. It happens on laptop computers that are connected to networks. It comes back to this very first point we made. The desire to be connected 24/7, 365 also means, while we are starting to commence our investigation, if the suspect identifies that they are now in trouble, they have the capacity to remotely log on to the phone that we're seizing, the computer, the desktop, the laptop, whatever, or the cloud service, and start deleting the evidence you need for your investigation. So decisions have to be made very quickly. So here's an example of internal computer logs. As we mentioned, they get changed very quickly. But when you look at computer logs, they're not all written in the same language. And so you would need to get your technical people to take care of that. So just be aware, the cloud is made up of numerous components from numerous different businesses doing many, many, many different functions. We do not need to know the technical side of that as a fraud investigators, but just be aware you might need to bring an expert into your team who can convert logs into a single language that we can use. As CFEs, we are expected by our courts to produce evidence of the highest legal, admissible, and ethical standard. That is part of being a certified fraud examiner. This can be very complex. So in the case study I said, where we explained about the 15 million IP, that goes before a court. I have to explain to the court in language that the judge and jury will understand what the evidence is and how it's been collected. If there are questions about how does a cloud work, I have to have somebody available who's an expert who can explain to the court in clear language what cloud computing is and how it works. In the US, some of the people I spoke to there, and again, I can't mention names because of the ethical consent forms, they said when they put cases in their jurisdiction before the court, they get an independent expert, person who's a true expert in whatever technical field. And they use that person to explain the court in simple language what the technology is, what it works, how it works, and why it can be relied upon. That takes the burden off you as the fraud examiner, so you don't have to do it. And you shouldn't have to do it because you don't have to be an expert on everything. You just need to know the people to come and help you. So in your pre-investigation plan, have your legal people available who can give you the correct legal advice for your jurisdiction. Have the contacts for digital forensics examiners who can work in this space. And when you come to court, an independent expert who can help you in this pathway of navigating the process of court. Your local rules of evidence are different to mine, but they all come to the same thing. We bring a charge, we have to prove it. And losing the case, especially in the civil realm, can cost a lot of money, and that's obviously we don't want that. You keep your evidence to the most clearest standard, because with juries, we get people who are very, very technically aware and others who are not. So we have to cater for everyone. When you commence your investigation with cloud evidence, be aware it can cost a lot of money, especially when you are getting lawyers and other legal jurisdictions to obtain evidence from cloud providers for you. Now, those of you who work for multinational corporations who have offices throughout the world, you are fortunate because you can call on their legal services to provide you the help without having to hire independent lawyers in foreign jurisdictions. The cost of storage. If you're asking for 10 terabytes of data from a cloud provider, that's going to take a lot of storage and a lot of time, and there might be a charge associated with it. So again, I'll come back to this last point made in the previous presentation, your investigation plan. Before you even get the call to come and start talking to a client who wants you to conduct investigation and cloud evidence, to have your own investigation plan where you understand where to go, how to seek evidence, what it means, will take a lot of stress and complexity out of the day. And it makes you look very competent in front of your client, the fact that you have pre-prepared for this complex environment. If you work for a large organization where you have to do an investigation, having an investigation plan, and this is the NIST, the US NIST cybersecurity framework, but if you have got an investigation plan in the drawer that you can bring out when something major happens, and they call you in as part of the investigation team, if you've got an investigation plan, it again takes a lot of the complexity out of the day. And never underestimate that second last point, eliminate the stress. Because when things go wrong in a businesses where they find they've been hacked or they've had internal theft or a major fraud, people get very stressed very quickly and things get very frightening very quickly. Part of your agreement is just let's just say for your own business, is if there is an incident, who do you ring at the cloud provider for support? Do you have a direct line phone number, a 24-hour, 7 days a week phone number? You don't want to be calling call centers or leaving messages. In your own organization, you might well be with a cloud provider. But who do you call when you as an investigator need evidence? If you can get straight on the phone through your investigation plan and have their contact details, while people are stressing over the crime, you're already well on the way to mitigating the damage. Investigation thresholds, and that's an important point. Work out a budget with your client. How much are they prepared to spend, and is it worth it? Because sometimes if you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars in investigation fees for a $5,000 fraud, they might decide no. These are decisions which need to be made. We come back to this point, the investigation teams talk to the legal representatives early, promptly, get that evidence saved, ask them to save the logs. What can you do for us? Tell us the wording of what you need to accurately seize the evidence that you need. Maybe your legal people say you can log in and download what you need. Maybe you're lucky like that, but more often than not, having a legal contact, your legal contact, to give you the advice on what you can and can't do, super important. Because as I've said, when these things happen, people are highly stressed because the crime is usually continuing or the bad guy still has access to the cloud. And here we go, legal specialists. I can't emphasize that enough. I can give you very general information so you have got a general understanding of what's happening, but your legal jurisdiction is different to mine, and you might have different rules, different courts, levels of court might have different requirements. Here again, this point, the cloud evidence needs to be as a priority. Now, in the case study I spoke about before, with a $15 million IP, yes, we had a crime scene. Yes, we had a computer where the bad guy was, but we had that under control. We removed it from the network. He could not log in. But our focus was laser sharp on the cloud, because once he put it in his cloud account, he could send it to other cloud accounts. He could put it on open websites. He could just dump it on a paste bin sort of site. He could just sell it on the criminal markets and on the dark web. He could have done anything with it he chose. So time was of the essence there. So the cloud evidence was as a priority, and getting that evidence locked down that we needed, that was also another priority. And this is another very important point. As CFEs, everything we do does not end up in the one layer of court. Not everything is going to go to a criminal court. You might have a client that says, we want you to do a thorough investigation and get evidence, and we are going to dismiss this employee based on their behavior because they've obviously done something very wrong. That is a different level of intensity of investigation to as if somebody's stolen $15 million worth of intellectual property and put it in the cloud and is going to sell it online. Knowing what your clients exactly want is an important question any CFE will ask at the initial engagement, because that is what you are hired for. If you are working for your own employer and they have a major problem that needs your CFE skills, sitting down and having a conversation and finding, where do you want this to end up? Is this to be an internal process? Are you doing an investigation to understand what went wrong and fix it without trying to play blame? Or is it of a level where it's going to be referred to your law enforcement, or you're going to prosecute someone in a civil court? For example, another case, we had a company hacked into another company and stole $15 million No, this was $5 million worth of intellectual property. So know where you're going to end up. If you're not sure, prepare for the worst case. What is the highest level of evidence that you can present before the court? Cover all the bases. Your CFEs, you're experienced. You are seen to have a higher level of knowledge than most people. And you never know. You might be called in to do an investigation where you think, okay, we've got this small problem here. It's only a certain level. And then as you do your investigation, you find out it is not just small. You're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and there's a major criminal offence that's been occurred. So you start off low, and it suddenly gets very, very aggressive. So if you're remote forensics, what you do in one jurisdiction might be legal if it's illegal in another. And again, this is where your legal team come into it. Plan for complexity. Validate the evidence. Now you're getting evidence from multiple different sources. How do you validate it? In the example that I spoke about with the IP stolen, we were able to copy the evidence from the cloud service with authority, of course, and compare it to the cloud evidence, the intellectual property stolen from the client. We could prove it was exactly the same. The evidence in the cloud was exactly the same as the evidence on the computer of the database of the complaining company. If you can have some various levels that confirm everything that you are saying, it's like any evidence. You might have a witness statement, you might have physical evidence, you might have a confession from the person, all confirming the same point. So with cloud evidence, if you can confirm the evidence from the cloud from multiple points, that's a great thing to be able to do. So what's next? We started off talking about the 5¼ inch floppy drive, the 3.5 drive, the CD, DVDs, USBs, etc. Cloud is just the next step to whatever comes next. Cloud's going to be around for a long time, but there is going to be other technology. We have a look at all the Internet of Things that is going on. All the different devices in smart homes, smart buildings, smart cities. These are all important things. And as investigators, this is very important evidence that CFEs you will collect to find out who the person did the wrong thing at the wrong time. Now, they keep coming back to this point. As CFEs, we're expected to investigate at a higher level and get things correct first time. So as you look around the world, there's not a lot of established case law regarding cloud evidence. Before you even begin your investigation, I can't emphasize enough, have your investigation plan understood. How are you going to investigate complexity? In your organization, you might have one investigation plan. If you're called as a CFE into an external client, have another investigation plan. If you turn up on the door of your client with an investigation plan, that makes you look very impressive because you know the complexity and how to deal with it. Again, I come back to this point, communication with the cloud provider, super important. Different legal jurisdictions, cloud's still finding its place in the world, but make sure the information I've given you is for your general knowledge and it's not specific legal advice, and get your own legal advice within your own particular jurisdiction. So that's me, Graeme Edwards, CFE on LinkedIn, and that's a book I wrote which contains this. So feel free to contact if you need any advice or any support. You know, a question's only a few moments away.
Thank you, Graeme. Some questions are there, 3-4 questions. Can you answer? Will you please answer? I'll read out for you.
Yes, thank you.
What is very essential for an organization? The machine or the data and controls that protect data. There are laws across the globe for protection of personally identifiable information and sensitive data. Are there laws to protect the machine itself, which stores the data on cloud? For that example, how do I ensure that when I upgrade or replace machines, data is protected or erased before the disposal of the old machine by the cloud operator?
That's a very difficult one, and that really comes back to communication with the cloud provider. And that's actually a very good question, which I don't think a lot of people have actually asked or considered before, because that's incredibly important. Because I imagine when you look at the big cloud providers, they have very strong protocols about protecting clients' data on their infrastructure when they delete it. So there's laws protecting personally identifiable information in most legal jurisdictions, and I've mentioned European Union, individual countries like France and Germany. Then you look at the United States, they've got their own privacy protection laws. Access to data is restricted and protected. The cloud companies come under any other data disclosure laws that if they lose personally identifiable information, they have to make it publicly available. And I'm not aware of any circumstances where the infrastructure has been compromised. Possibly there is, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay, one more question.
Certainly.
What type of security aspects to be covered in the third-party cloud servicing agreement?
Security for the third party, is that regarding like a reseller? The person, I gave the example of Amazon Web Service had their own architecture, and another business like ABC had 100 terabytes. Is that what you mean?
Okay. Shall I ask one more?
Yes, please. I just want to provide...
cloud computing.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, go.
It is from Srinath. As the cloud computing is generally considered as multi-tenant cloud environment, where many user organizations share resources, how the risk of data leakage is addressed? Is it not better to have dedicated servers and resources are used exclusively by one organization? How can we do a review of the data privacy and confidentiality requirements for a client as part of the forensic review?
Okay, that's a very important question, understanding the security of data in a multi-tenancy environment. The cloud providers have very strong protocols to protect your data so it does not get intermingled with others. It's highlighted by the fact that we have been using cloud for probably a best part of a decade now, decade plus, and the data leakages in the circumstances that you mentioned in that very good question are just not occurring amongst you look at the major international corporations. Multi-tenancy is one of the advantages of cloud. Now, if you've got an organization that wants to go cloud, you can put a lot of information up in the cloud, but you can also keep a lot of the most important company data within your services. You don't have to put everything up in the cloud. So you find a lot of companies actually do that. They put a lot of material up in the cloud, but their most important intellectual property, they keep it for themselves. They do not put it up in the cloud. They still run a restricted network, which is basically the most important corporate data. So for your client's question, you would look and see, what are you prepared to put up in the cloud? In a worst case scenario, how serious would a breach be? The cloud providers, through the end user license agreement and general discussions, they will give you advice. But a lot of companies say, we will put the best stuff on our own services, but there's a lot of other material which can be public facing via the cloud. Thank you very much for the very kind invitation. I wish you very best for the rest of your conference. Thank you once again.